Yes, Judge. Lawrence Pilcher.
Lawrence Pilcher. Sir, do you swear upon the testimony you're about to give this case the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do not.
You are right next to them. Would you please be careful with this step? You may.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lawrence Pilcher.
All right. How are you employed?
I work at the KSP Central Forensics Laboratory in Frankfort, Kentucky.
And what do you do there?
My job title is Specialist 2. My specialty is firearms and tool marks identification.
Okay. How long have you been doing that?
Overall, almost 17 years that I've been with KSP, a little over 10.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your education?
In 2000, I graduated from EKU with a degree in forensic science. From there, I was picked up by the Rhode Island State Crime Laboratory. From there, I was selected as one of 14 students for the National Firearms Examiners Academy that was sponsored and put on by the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which was a one-year accelerated training program. During that one-year term, we had extensive training, 40 hours a week. We toured probably at least a dozen firearms manufacturing plants to see how firearms are put together and the manufacturing processes, along with ammunition plants. I've had training in shooting incident reconstruction, serial number restoration. I take advantage of any training that's afforded me if I possibly can, do it.
And do you continue your training as you're going on with your career?
We try our best to. The state is kind of limited on its funding, but we do what we can.
Okay. And how many firearms have you examined over the course of your career? Do you have any idea?
I would say probably somewhere close to 10,000.
Okay. And what exactly does a firearms and tool marks examiner do?
Our primary job is to examine any evidence that's related to a firearm or a tool that's found at a scene. See if there's any relation to an unknown in that case. That simply means if there's a cartridge case and a firearm recovered, we are tasked to see if that cartridge case was fired from that firearm or not.
Okay. And if there isn't a firearm recovered, can you do testing in a case like that where you just receive casings?
Yes, there's other things that we can do depending on the evidence that is submitted.
Okay. Now, one of the first questions I want to ask you is to tell the jury about how a firearm works when it fires a bullet.
Well, there's several different types of firearms.
What about a handgun?
Semi-automatic.
Yes.
I'd be happy to do that. Semi-automatic firearm is basically it's a tool of itself. It's a small machine, but its main purpose is to discharge a unit of ammunition and reload itself. That is done by taking a magazine, filling that magazine with live ammunition, inserting the magazine into the firearm itself. Typically, one would draw the slide to the rear, which takes when you let go of the slide, you have in effect cocked the gun. When you release the slide, it picks up one round of ammunition from the magazine, loads it into the chamber. At that point in time, if you pull the trigger, you discharge the cartridge, sending a bullet down range. With the energy that is left over from this reaction, the firearm basically cocks, ejects, the slide comes back, it loads itself again, and it's ready to fire again. So every time you pull the trigger, as long as there's ammunition in the magazine, it will continue to function until mechanical failure.
Okay. And whenever a handgun is fired, what does it propel?
A projectile.
Okay. Does it expel something as well?
Typically a spent cartridge case.
Okay. Is that what I refer to as a casing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when a handgun is fired, does it leave some type of marking on the casing or the projectile?
Yes. Many of the firearms are manufactured with very hard steel, and the ammunition components are typically made of copper and brass, which is much softer than steel. When any two items come in contact with each other, the harder always marks the softer metal. And during that process, you can have magazine marks as the round is fed into the chamber. Once the bullet enters the chamber and is discharged, that bullet is forced down the barrel, which has also been machined. That barrel has microscopic imperfections just from the manufacturing process that are often passed on to the bullet as it passes by. Again, the cartridge case, during the discharge, is pressed backwards toward the back of the slide, leaving an imprint of another manufacturing area that can and usually has a very unique surface to it. There's other actions depending on the type of semi-automatic firearm, and each one of those additional actions will leave another mark.
Okay. And does every firearm leave a different mark on something that it fires? Let me ask that question.
Well, typically, the answer is both yes and no.
Okay.
You have class characteristics, which means that most of the firearms that you see that were fired from the blocks look much alike to the naked eye.
Mm-hmm.
But on a microscopic level, those marks are vastly different.
And do you examine those items on a microscopic level?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you able to determine whether a particular casing is fired from a particular firearm?
Yes, ma'am, that's my job.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you about some items that you received in this particular case. Okay. Judge, may I approach? Thank you. Mr. Pilcher, I want to ask you about, did you receive some items in this case?
Yes.
Okay. The homicide of Jonathan Price.
Yes.
Okay. And what were the first, how many submissions did you have overall?
Total there was, I believe, 3.
Okay. Let's talk about the first submission. What was the first submission that you received in this case?
Originally, I was sent or submitted to the laboratory a single 45 auto cartridge case and 1 projectile.
Okay. And let's just show you. It has been marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit 34. Do you recognize this item?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you read for the jury what that item is?
This is the same case number that's reflected on my report. This is the spent 45 auto cartridge case. There's a yellow barcode indicating that it's been to our laboratory. My initials is on the barcode indicating the case has been worked and is ready to be released. And it appears to still be under laboratory seal.
What does that mean? When it's under laboratory seal?
Anytime that we open the package, in this particular case, I opened it across here.
Okay.
We place a security seal along with the date that it was sealed and the initials of who it was sealed by.
Okay. So you can tell this is the item that you examined?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And can you read where this shell casing, if it's on the envelope, was recovered?
The envelope reflects that this cartridge case, spent cartridge case, was found at the parking lot on 2350 Wood Hill. The last parking row west, second parking space south on West Road.
Okay. And I've had someone, another witness prior to having to go through this, but would you mind just taking that item
Sure.
out?
This is still sealed.
Okay. And could you show that item to the jury?
It's hard to see in the container, but it's a spent cartridge case.
I think we can put it here, actually.
Looks like it's probably been fingerprinted, so.
Okay. Could you place it? Here. Mr. Bush, you may have to hold it closer to this so that they can Can you read what kind of manufacturer this is for the jury?
This was marketed by Winchester.
Okay, that particular casing.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and this is one of the first items you received, and you also said you received a projectile. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you what I'm going to mark as Commonwealth Exhibit 83. And you do have some scissors there, I believe. Could you identify this item?
Yes, this is the same barcode with initials. The package was marked by the submitting agency as a projectile from Jonathan Price at Autopsy.
Okay. And was this included with the first set of submissions you received?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see your handwriting on there in the lab seal?
Yes, it is intact. This was not the original packaging that was submitted in. Anything that comes in from autopsy is cleaned and repackaged to prevent any type of contamination.
Okay. So the first two items you received were the projectile and that casing that I just showed you.
Yes, ma'am.
What were you asked to do with those items?
I believe it was just a preliminary examination to determine the caliber of the projectile and if there was any chance that we could give them any more information off the markings that were obtained on the cartridge case.
Okay. And did you go about testing those items?
Yes.
How did you do that?
Well, initially it's just more or less of a physical exam. With the cartridge case, we are documenting all the physical attributes, the manufacturer, material that's made out of, what types of marks are observed on it. Since we don't have another cartridge case, there's nothing really to compare it to. So at that point, it's basically just documentation. Sometimes we're able to tell what type of firearm may have been used to put the marks on that particular item. With the projectile in this case, the caliber is always determined by weight of the projectile, the diameter of the projectile, and the design. If we have an intact projectile, and we have those three items that are known, which means we have all the information we need, we can determine the caliber.
What three items are you referring to when you say what all three items are known?
The weight,
Okay.
the design,
Okay.
and the diameter of the projectile.
Okay, I understand now. So in this particular case, were you able to determine what kind of projectile this was?
It's a 45, yes ma'am.
Okay, that projectile that was recovered is a .45 caliber?
45 auto, yes ma'am.
Okay. And what about the casing that you received, the first submission?
It's 45, it's stamped on the back.
Okay, and can you tell, it's stamped on the back. Is that what you just showed the jury with the?
Yes, the caliber is actually stamped on most cartridge cases, not all, but most.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you about a second set of submissions that you received. Can you tell us about that, please?
I did receive a second set. At a later date, I had received 5 additional 45 auto cartridge cases.
Okay, and I just picked these up and dropped them. Apologies. But can you look at those and see if those are the additional items that you received?
I'd say lab number, the initials are on the packaging and on each item. My initials are here.
Okay. And what were you asked to do with these shell casings?
The agency that had submitted these had requested that they can be compared to the single prior submitted spent Winchester 45 auto cartridge case.
Okay. Did you do that?
Yes, ma'am.
And tell us about how you went about doing that.
Basically, it's a very simple process. We take a look at the cartridge cases that were submitted the second time, and we compare those to each other. If we find marks within those cartridge cases that are consistent, repeating, that we can find them over and over and over again, at that point in time, we can go back and examine those directly or compare them to the other cartridge case that was submitted earlier.
Okay.
So it's basically a cartridge case to cartridge case comparison, and that's simply done on a comparison microscope, where you have two separate stages that move independent of each other, and one set of eyepieces that you can bring two items side by side and compare them directly.
Okay. And that I just showed you is Commonwealth's Exhibit 11. In those 5 casings, you compared them to the original casing you had, item 1. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did they all match item 1?
Not all of them.
Okay, tell us about that.
One of them did not.
Okay. And which item was that?
Item 21, my item 21, had a substantially different firing pin impression than the first cartridge case that was submitted and the 5 cartridge cases that were submitted, the 4 cartridge cases that were submitted the second time, or the second submission, pardon me.
Okay. So were you able to match any of the casings that you received in the second submission to number 1, the casing you received in the first submission?
4 of them.
Okay. And what are you able to determine from that?
That they were identified as being fired in the same unknown firearm at that point.
Okay. So those are fired from the same unknown firearm. At some point, did you receive a firearm in this case?
Yes, a little bit later.
Okay. And when did that occur?
A firearm first came in the laboratory on September 5th, 2014.
Okay.
It was received by me,
Okay.
and it was basically in and out of my custody until March of the following year.
Okay. And I'm going to show you now that we are going to work with Commonwealth Exhibit 84? Mm-hmm. Okay, 84. I'm going to mark the box, but would you mind to take the box out? Thank you.
And again, our laboratory barcode label. It does appear that it's still under laboratory seal. And my initials are on the label indicating that the case has been worked and it's ready to be returned.
Okay. Can you identify from looking at those labels if this is the firearm that you examined in this case?
Not with 100% certainty, I'd like to open up the box, but
Please do.
it should be the same item that I've returned to the submitting agency.
Okay. Would you mind opening the box, please?
Yes, ma'am.
And while you're opening this, let me ask you this question. Before you put the firearm in the box, it is made safe.
Absolutely.
You make sure there's no ammunition in it,
Absolutely.
and you can verify that for us now.
Matter of fact, the gun is still cocked to the rear,
Okay.
and the magazine is stored separately.
What is the magazine when we're looking at it?
The magazine is nothing more than a device that holds ammunition
Can you show
that
them?
feeds the firearm. So the magazine is the silver unit at the top.
That?
Yes.
Okay. And is this the firearm that you examined with relation to this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when you received that firearm, after you had conducted the initial case, or the initial testing on the first casing of the projectile and then the secondary set of casings, what were you asked to do in relation to this firearm with all of that evidence you already had?
Basically, the submitting agency wanted to know if this firearm was responsible for the cartridge cases that were submitted in the first and second submission.
Okay. Can you tell us about the testing you did then to determine that?
Sure. Anytime that a firearm is submitted to the laboratory, we physically examine it to make sure that it's in a safe mechanical condition for testing. As long as we deem it safe and in fairly good operational condition, we then obtain known standards. Basically, all that means is we get ammunition from our laboratory's ammunition stock that's similar to what's submitted. We mark that ammunition with our laboratory number, the item number, our initials, and we feed it and fire it through the gun. Typically, we take a minimum of 3 standards which means we shoot this gun 3 times into a water tank. We recover the cartridge cases off the floor, and we recover the bullets from the water tank. At that point in time, those are our known standards. Again, we take those to the microscope. If we can compare our known standards and find consistent markings of a unique nature that repeat over and over and over on all 3 cartridge cases, we're able to compare those standards that we took to whatever was submitted prior in the case.
Okay, and that's something you're trained to do.
It's something we do every day.
All right. This particular firearm, what kind of firearm is that?
This is a Springfield Model XDS Chamberlain 45 Auto.
Okay. Did you make a note of the serial number of this firearm?
I did.
Okay, and what is that?
The serial number is XS696718.
Okay. And did you determine this is a functional firearm?
It is.
So it will fire?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the testing that you did, were you able to determine if the first item that you received, item 1, that was retrieved from the Austin City parking lot, if that was fired from this particular gun?
I identified it as being fired in this firearm. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, in this firearm. What is that?
Your Honor, may we approach, please?
Go back to your left. I think you had just testified that item 1, the casing you received from the parking lot at 2300 Woodhill, was fired from the firearm that you received.
Yes, ma'am.
And is that your opinion within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you about the other casings that you received, the 5 that you received, the secondary submissions, okay?
Mhm.
Did you attempt to compare to see if those casings were also fired from that firearm?
I did.
Okay. And what was your opinion as to that?
4 of the 5 that were submitted, my items 17, 18, 19, and 20, were identified as being discharged in this particular firearm.
Okay, and is that also within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
And did you go back and try to see if you could compare the projectile that you received to see if that was fired from that firearm?
I did.
Okay, and can you tell us about that?
The markings that were found on the projectile that was originally submitted were not quite sufficient for an identification.
Okay.
It didn't meet our threshold at the laboratory for our professional organization and our training to meet the qualifications for identification. It was determined that that was inconclusive. Basically, that means it could not be identified, yet there was no characteristics that could eliminate it either.
Okay. And so when you say eliminate or identified as being discharged from, what does that mean? Layman's terms.
Basically, it either was or it was not. Identified is an association of 2 items together. An elimination is the disassociation of 2 items together.
Okay.
An example would be most pistols have a rifling structure. Commonly is a 6 lands and grooves with a right-hand twist, which means there's basically 6 long grooves in the barrel that basically spins the bullet to the right, and those lanes and grooves are actually cut into the bullet and can be measured. There are other pistols that do not use a system of 6 right, but use a system of 5 right, or 7 right, or even 6 left. So if we have a bullet that is 6 right, yet our gun is a 6 left, that's an elimination. It can't possibly have come from that firearm.
Okay.
Rifling, they're not anywhere near the same.
Okay, and so is your opinion within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty in this case that you could not say that the projectile was definitively fired from that firearm, but you could not say that it was not?
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what has been marked as Commonwealth's Exhibits 85 through 93. And do you also take photographs of the items that you examine?
I do.
Okay, and can you take a look at those photographs and tell the jury that those are photographs of the items that you examined, and I'll show them up here.
These 5 cartridge cases are all Winchester spent .45 auto. This was the second submission that came to our laboratory.
And this is Commonwealth's Exhibit 85. And you said, let me ask you this. Can you tell from looking at these, how can you tell that 4 of them, in your opinion, were fired from that firearm within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty and 1 was not? How can you tell?
Well, not directly from the photograph. Each one of these cartridge cases was microscopically examined.
Okay.
That was just an overall photograph of the evidence that was submitted.
Okay, and that's Commonwealth's Exhibit 83. Now, what about that next, or 85? What about that next photograph?
This particular photograph is the cartridge case standard on the left. And this was our item 21. This was the second submission, one of the cartridge cases that did not match.
Okay, and I'm going to show, this is Commonwealth's Exhibit 86. Now, which one is the standard?
The one on the left,
And what's the standard?
it is a .45 auto
Okay. And
that I discharged
from what?
from this particular firearm.
Okay, and does that have a, we can kind of tell from this photo, but are there different markings between the two?
Absolutely. They're clearly different there.
Okay, and what about this? You said this is fired from, it's your opinion that that was, or you did fire that one, that's the standard?
Yes.
Okay.
The standards in this case, typically 99% of the time, what we see in our actually casework, or 95% of the time, is a hemispherical firing pin.
What does that mean?
What you observe on the right hand of the photograph is a bowl-shaped dent in the back of the primer. It is like half of a ball. It is shaped in a hemisphere, which means the firing pin had a curved nose, much like half of a ball. The Springfield XDS is one of the only firearms that has a chiseled firing pin.
And which one are you referring to? What's the chiseled firing pin?
It's the firing pin impression that's observed on the left-hand photograph.
Okay.
It is not hemispherical. It's not round. It's not square. It has a very unique characteristic, more of a chisel point than anything else.
And did you say that's unique to what?
In my 16, 17 years, this was the first time in my career that I came across that mark.
Okay. And what would that mark be unique to, in your opinion?
At the time, and from what I still believe today, is that particular type of mark only comes from Springfield Model XDS firearms.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what's been marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit 88. Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And could you just tell us what this is?
That was the .45 auto projectile that was submitted to our laboratory at the first submission.
Okay. I'm going to show you Commonwealth's 89. Do you recognize this photo?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell the jury what that is?
That was the original photograph that I took of the head stamp, meaning the back of the cartridge case, of the first cartridge case that was the first submission to the laboratory. Basically, that is a close-up shot of this particular item here.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what's been marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit 90. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Okay. And can you explain for the jury what we see there?
What you're looking at here is a direct comparison between the first cartridge case that was submitted, item 1 in my case, and the second, one of the second cartridge cases that was submitted in the second submission was item 17, my laboratory number 17. This is a direct microscopic comparison from the markings found on one to the markings found on the other.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what has been marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit 91. Do you recognize that?
This is a fairly close-up photograph of the of a defect that I had found in the shirt that was submitted to the laboratory.
Okay. Were you submitted a shirt, the victim's shirt, in this case?
Not directly.
Okay.
The request came through our DNA section,
Mm-hmm.
and the shirt was transferred interagency to my section with a
Okay.
request that it be tested for distance.
Okay, and what does that mean to be tested for distance?
Basically, what they're looking for is well, what we would be looking for is a pattern of gunshot residue. A firearm has a specific distance where the gunshot residue will fall off. Basically, a bullet that is coming down the barrel, once it leaves the barrel, there's a tremendous amount of pressure behind that bullet, upwards of 30, 40, 60,000 pounds per square inch, much like a champagne cork of a hot bottle that's been shooken. When that happens, you have an explosion of fire, heat, burned and unburned gunshot powder, basically. It doesn't have a whole lot of weight, but it does have a lot of velocity at that point in time. But because it doesn't weigh much, the velocity falls off exponentially, very, very rapidly. So typically, if we're asked to do a gunshot residue test, there's a chance, or the submitting agency believes that the gun was fired in fairly close proximity, basically meaning anywhere from contact to up to about 40 inches.
Can you see any soot, or did you see any soot on the shirt that you examined?
I physically and chemically processed the shirt, and a gunshot residue pattern was not developed.
Okay, and so what does that mean for you, in your opinion?
My range of conclusions is no pattern was developed. There's possibly two reasons for that. One, there's a intervening object, which means there was something in between the muzzle and the shirt. That could be as simple as a jacket, another shirt,
Okay.
or another object, or it was probably at a distance that exceeds 40, 42 inches.
The gun was fired from a distance that exceeds 40 or 42 inches?
It's a possibility.
Okay, that's one of the possibilities.
The fact that I didn't find gunshot residue doesn't necessarily mean that that's a finding.
Okay.
It just means I didn't find it.
Okay. And Judge, I'm going to change, I marked this as exhibit 91, but I think I skipped 87, so change 91 to 87. And at this time, the Commonwealth would move to introduce exhibits 85 through 90. And yes, also 83 and 84. Yes. So, Mr. Pilcher, that's all the questions I have for you this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Mr. Pilcher, you cannot say with 100% certainty that there's not another Springfield XDS out there that's a better match to the case you recovered from the Austin City Park.
Good afternoon. It's a different standard that you're using to compare to than what our industry standard is. In our laboratory, we have a range of conclusions of identification, elimination, inconclusive, and unsuitable. We don't have a standard for scientific certainty per se. We follow the API theory of identification, which is the basis that all of the firearms examiners around the world use to be trained and to learn basically what we do. And once you've met that standard during your examination, API determines that it's to the point of a practical impossibility.
So, are you familiar with the FBI standard and the letter they issued in 2013 to their firearms examiners that said the science regarding firearms examination does not permit examiner testimony that a specific gun fired a specific bullet to the exclusion of all other guns in the world?
Was that part of the NSA report?
No, that is a directive to the firearms examiners who work for the FBI as of 2013.
I don't know much about it.
In this case, you tested only one Springfield XDS, right?
There was only one submitted.
And the gun that you tested, your Honor, may I approach the witness? The gun that you tested is a completely black gun, right?
It most certainly is.
So when we're looking at the magazine right here, the magazine would be inserted at the base of the gun.
It's called the magazine well, but yes, ma'am.
Okay? All right. And so someone looking at that gun would see a completely black handgun,
One would hope.
assuming that there's not something wrong with their ability to view colors.
I'm colorblind, but I see black.
Okay. You indicated that you've done a distance test in this case. And the conclusion from that, assuming that the individual was not wearing another layer, is that the gun would have been fired at a range greater than 40 inches away, right?
That's an assumption. My conclusions are there was no pattern that was developed. I can't give you a reason why there was no pattern developed. But my range of conclusions is either a pattern or no pattern.
So without a pattern, you can't say that that gun was fired at a range closer than 40 inches, can you?
That would be an assumption.
You also examined a projectile that's been introduced. And just so we're clear, the projectile is the part of the bullet that's actually ejected out of the gun and head.
Yes, that is the object that goes downrange.
The casing is covering the projectile, and in a semi-automatic that's ejected from the gun by a slide, right?
Yes, a single round of ammunition is comprised of a projectile, a cartridge case, propellant or gunpowder, and a primer.
In this case, you recovered a Winchester .45 Auto, which is an ACP.
I didn't recover it.
Oh, I'm sorry, you at your lab, you did testing on
Yes.
45.
The actual caliber is .45 auto.
Okay. And those types of ammunition are designed specifically for semi-automatics, right?
The cartridge case was designed to be fired in a semi-automatic pistol, yes ma'am.
So there are some revolvers that can take these rounds, but they're very rare, right?
There are some revolvers, you can use moon clips that basically clip to part of the live round to hold it in place in a revolver so it will discharge. I wouldn't say that it's common knowledge to everybody to know that, that may have a firearm or not, but it's possible, yes.
So typically, if you're observing a casing from a projectile from a revolver, you're going to be looking at a different type of projectile than the one in this case.
There are revolvers that are chambered in .45, just not .45 auto.
And that's what we have here at 45 Auto.
Yes, I didn't observe any slippage marks that would typically be found if the bullet would have been shot down from a revolver. Typically, slippage marks are obtained when a projectile goes from the cylinder, the rotating part, through a small cylinder gap and forced into the barrel. When that bullet actually starts to move forward, it has no rotation right or left, but it does have forward momentum at a fairly high speed because it has to jump from the cylinder into the barrel. Well, when it hits the rifling, it wants to stay stationary, but the rifling forces it either right or left. So you have a slippage or skid marks that are left on the projectile. I didn't see them on this particular case.
So you didn't see any slippage that would be consistent with this being fired from a revolver, and this is a round typically designed to be fired from a semi-automatic.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And in one of your reports, you indicated that the projectile was in pristine condition.
Not sure it's in my report, but it's in my notes.
Okay. So let's talk about the examination process here. When you are examining either a casing or a projectile, you are laying out the casings that you're comparing side by side, right, under a microscope.
Well, they're marked first, but yeah, they have to be side by side to make a comparison.
And on a casing, what you're analyzing is the breech face and where the firing pin has hit the casing, right?
Typically, that's one of the first areas we look at, but there are several areas within a cartridge case that we will use and possibly utilize for an examination.
And so unlike the projectile, the cartridge cage is not going to travel down the barrel of the gun, right?
Not normally.
So the sides of the cartridge are not going to be marked up by the gun.
No, there are chamber markings that can be found.
Okay. But not as many as you would see perhaps on a projectile going down the barrel.
Those are two different type of markings.
Okay. I'm just talking about where the markings are located.
But you're talking about two different items.
Yes, I understand. I'm just talking about your focus of the analysis on the casing is on the breech face and the firing pin, right?
Typically, that is one of the important areas, yes.
Okay. When you do this examination, you're not running these bullets through some sort of machine or computer that's doing the analysis. You yourself are the one looking with the microscope to determine whether there is a match or not.
That's correct.
And are Combo's pictures still up there?
They are.
So there are some markings called class characteristics, right?
Yes.
And those are markings that are going to allow you to determine what type of gun we're talking about.
Yes.
So, the example here, this is how you would be observing this under your microscope, right? Two side by side.
That's where the photograph was taken.
So here what we see, what would be a class characteristic, is the differences in the firing pin impressions. Here you said this is a fairly common one that you see right here.
Yes.
And here we have a different, I think you said a chisel type impression. It's more sort of up and down and has a little drag mark right here, right?
That's correct.
So the class characteristics you can look at and you can sort of determine what type of gun you're looking at. Not the specific gun, but what type. So in this case, a Springfield XDS.
That's correct.
When you received the casing in this case, you were unable initially to look at this mark and determine what kind of gun it was without some assistance.
That's correct. I had actually, I was surprised to see the mark on that cartridge case.
Because up to this point in this case, you had never examined a Springfield XDS 35 before.
I've never seen one.
Okay. So what you did was, you're a member of AFTI?
I am.
So that is the Association of Firearms and Tool Marks Examiners.
I have been for 16 years.
And AFTI has a technical forum, so you went onto that technical forum.
I did.
And you posted a picture of the firing pin impression that you saw.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And that was on July 25th, 2014, right?
I believe that's quite possible. I don't remember the day, but I do believe that I have that information.
If you could verify that date, I also have a copy. This would refresh your recollection.
Of the posting to the forum.
I'm sure your posting is just fine. It's small. I believe it's July 25th of 2014.
At 8:51 in the morning?
It appears that way.
Okay, so prior to July 25th of 2014,
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think
Sorry.
it's done, you did not know what type of gun could have possibly created this firing pin impression that we're seeing.
That was the reason for the post.
Okay. And so you wrote a report at that point and said that it was possibly a casing from a Springfield XDS 45.
I did.
You mentioned in your training that you went to dozens of plants that manufacture firearms.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's important in your training because the markings you're talking about are a result possibly of the manufacturing process, right?
They are the result of the manufacturing process.
So when we're talking about class characteristics, we're talking about, okay, a gun is not manufactured in one piece, right?
Of course not.
So-
Well, I can't
Most
say that,
guns?
but there are normally multiple
Okay.
parts.
Right. So like a firing pin is going to be manufactured on a line that's different maybe from the slide of the gun or some other part of the gun.
There's different manufacturing processes, but that's quite possible, yes.
So that's why, so a Springfield XDS has a particular shape of their firing pin that they manufacture.
It's part of their design.
Okay, so Springfield's firing pin is going to look different from another brand of firearms firing pin.
As far as class characteristics go, yes, ma'am.
And you indicated that firearms are made of hard steel, which is why when they come into contact with a softer material like the bullet, they leave impressions.
They leave some type of mark, yes,
They
ma'am.
leave some type of mark. So the manufacturing equipment that's making the parts of the gun is made out of material that's even harder than the steel of the gun.
Yes, it requires harder steel to actually cut and, during the manufacturing process of cutting steel.
And it's in the interest of the manufacturer who's mass producing this to have consistency of product, right?
They do.
Because they don't want to be selling a product that's defective or selling one product that's different from another product when it's supposed to be the same, right?
That's correct.
And so over time, the technology for that tool making by the manufacturers is getting better and better, right?
The manufacturing processes, yes.
Now, for every firearm to create an individual or unique imprint upon a casing, then those firing pins or those breech faces being manufactured must be different enough that they would leave those unique markings.
Yes, ma'am.
And not only unique enough that they would leave markings, but unique enough that you can put them under a microscope and observe those differences.
Absolutely.
You already established that you're a member of AFTI, and AFTI has a specific theory of identification that examiners are supposed to use, correct?
That's correct.
And that says that if an examiner sees that there are sufficient agreements between unique surface contours of two tool markings, then they can make an opinion of common origin.
That's right.
So sufficient agreement. Sufficient agreement is not clearly defined under the AFTI theory.
I think further on in the theory it is defined.
So sufficient agreement, my understanding is that there's an East Coast version of sufficient agreement and a West Coast version of sufficient agreement. Is that right?
The AFTI theory of identification is, it doesn't have an East and West Coast version. There are many ways to get to what one would consider sufficient agreement. But the process is mainly the same. It's just taking two roads to get to the same place.
Okay. And AFTI, at least in the theory that they publish publicly, has not indicated how many areas of matches an examiner needs to find before they can say this is of common origin.
A specific number? No.
Okay, so that's,
Now, there is a method out there called CMS, which is consistently matching stria. That tries to quantify the match by giving a specific number of matching lines that correspond, much like a fingerprint examiner would. Fingerprint examiner uses points. They expect to have at least 10 points on the side-by-side comparison to have some type of origin, and they would expect more for an identification. CMS is just a West Coast way of quantifying a single number to come to the same determination.
so that's a West Coast way, that's not the method you use?
CMS is a way to describe exactly what we do, but trying to put it in a numeric value.
Okay, so what you do does not have a numeric value?
Not specifically, no.
And the AFD theory also allows for an examiner to say that there's sufficient agreement even where there may be some differences in items. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And AFD admits that under their theory, this is a subjective process because you are relying on the examiner to make this determination, right?
That is correct.
Because the examiner has to be able to look at these items and decide
What is a class characteristic between what they're seeing, and what is a characteristic that is completely unique to that individual weapon, right?
Yes, but all human examinations are subjective in nature, all of them. Even your doctor's, diagnosis, it's subjective by nature.
Yeah, doctors can be wrong, right?
Yes, they can.
And so can firearms tool marks examiners.
There have been instances where mistakes have been made.
So when an examiner is looking, they have to make at two items and they're comparing them to see if they're from a common source. They have to think in their head whether the lines that they're seeing or the markings that they're seeing are from every Springfield XDS out there or just this Springfield XDS, right?
We are trained to determine and to be able to tell the difference between class, subclass, and individual characteristics.
And that's based off of your experience as well.
In training, yes ma'am.
And so when an examiner is doing this, they're supposed to be thinking about the best example they have of where there's definitely a match, right? So in this case, you got this gun, and you fired some bullets from that gun, right?
That's right.
So you knew those casings, the markings on those casings from that gun.
Yes ma'am.
Best known match. And then the examiner is supposed to think about a situation of the best known, what we call non-match.
That's right.
And a non-match is where it looks similar, but you know that it's come from two different guns.
That's correct.
Okay. And the examiner's weighing this in their mind before they make a determination about whether something's a match or not.
It takes 3 to 5 years to train before you actually start doing casework in our field. Your training is very extensive, and we literally look at tens of thousands of non-matches.
And so it's helpful when you have specific experience with different types of firearms too, to know how those firearms might leave markings in situations and it's still a non-match. And that was a very unfair question, so I apologize.
That's quite okay. That's why we tour manufacturing plants. We have our AFT members do research papers on new manufacturing processes that are done by specific manufacturers and new firearms that are released to the market.
So in this case, as we've established, examined a casing from a Springfield XDS before, had you?
At that point, I had never seen one.
And this was the only Springfield XDS sitting in front of you that you fired and examined during this case.
But that was the only one submitted.
So it was a weapon you had no prior experience with prior to this case.
I'm not sure what you mean by
No
prior experience, but
examining. Prior to this case.
I've examined thousands and thousands of semi-automatic handguns. This one is no different. It just so happens to be a different model.
Yeah, it's a very specific model by a specific manufacturer, right?
Yes, I've examined hundreds of Springfield XDs. I've been to their factory. It's just another firearm.
A firearm that you could not identify from the class characteristic of the firearm.
Identify? Nobody can make an identification from a class characteristic.
The type of firearm, Mr. Pilcher. You cannot identify the type of firearm.
I had never seen one before.
Are you familiar with the 2016 PCAST report?
Not fairly.
And PCAST stands for the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, right?
It does.
And that is a council comprised of professors in various scientific fields,
None of them are which are in forensics fields.
but various scientific fields. The president and CEO of the Aerospace Corporation, 8 federal judges, and several law professors, right?
That's correct.
And this particular report that this council worked on was called Forensic Science in Criminal Courts, Ensuring the Scientific Validity of Feature Comparison Methods. Feature comparison methods is essentially what you do, right?
Firearms was mentioned in that report, yes ma'am.
And the conclusion of the report was that your field, firearms analysis, fell short of the criteria for foundational validity.
That was an opinion, but yes.
Okay. Essentially what they were saying, so foundational validity is when the testing process is based on reliable principles and methods, okay?
That's correct.
And PCAST found that your field did not meet the criteria to say that it was based on reliable principles and methods.
I don't know why. The research has been done. AFTI had responded to that report.
And yet this report, which also examined a number of different studies, came to the conclusion that your field did not meet the requirements for scientific validity.
Again, that was an opinion.
And one of the issues they had was with your idea, your concept of unique markings appearing on all of these casings and projectiles, right?
That's correct.
Because they don't disagree that when 2 items come into contact, there are going to be some unique markings left. The issue is whether you can see them under your microscope.
Their issue is opinion based on inexperience and lack of knowledge. And they completely ignored scientific papers that were sent to that committee, that there was study after study after study that showed 2 items, 2 barrels, 2 whatever, manufactured from the same piece of steel by the same person on the same equipment on the same day, microscopically left completely different markings.
Those studies were all submitted by AFTI to this council. They reviewed them and they still found that your profession lacks scientific validity.
Again, that was their opinion. It's liking to your doctor telling your mechanic how well he is performing working on a car. He has no knowledge of what a mechanic does. So to criticize our profession without understanding the science, it wasn't fair.
So the science of your profession is looking to see whether there are consistent markings between 2 different items.
In a nutshell, yes ma'am.
And they also criticized the reliance, the heavy reliance on the training and experience of firearms and tool arms examiners.
But they did.
So let's July 24th, 2014, your lab was contacted by the Lexington Police Department asking you to narrow down the type of gun based off of the case, right?
No, I don't believe that that was their specific request, but that's something that we give them whether they ask for it or not.
In your lab, your agency keeps notes of various correspondence, right? Anytime someone calls in regarding a case, anytime there's an email sent out.
Typically,
So would it refresh your recollection if I were to show you a copy of that correspondence?
it wouldn't surprise me if it exists. I mean, this case was worked over 4 years ago.
Okay.
So on July 24th, Dawn with the Lexington, it says
Miss Brady, can we
LFUCP.
see that, please?
So according to these documents, your lab was contacted by someone at the Lexington Police Department who said,
And I'm just summarizing it, I'll show you and you can confirm. She told them that they'd recovered some guns potentially related to the case, but they wanted to know if they gave a narrowed down list of possible firearms.
That's something we do. Yeah.
And what was the date on that?
This was August 25th of 2014.
Okay.
I'm sorry, July 25th. I apologize. Of 2014.
And the next day is when you went and posted a copy of that firing pin impression on the AFTI website.
Okay?
So not June, but July.
I'm not sure about the time difference, but it's irrelevant.
in investigating this case, and particularly this gun, you gather information about the weapon, right?
Just physical information.
And you also gather any information about if there's been a recall for the weapon?
It's something that I can and at times do.
I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as Defense Exhibit number 13. Do you recognize this, Mr. Pilcher?
Looks familiar.
And what is it?
This is a recall notice from Springfield Armory's website
Okay. And,
concerning the XDS.
and you, in your testing and analysis of the gun, located this, didn't you?
Commonly do.
And they included a picture of a Springfield XDS, right?
Appears to be one.
And they included a picture of one with a silver slide.
That slab of silver.
And the report indicated that there were some occasions of accidental discharge with those particular models with that serial number, fitting in that serial number range, right?
They put out a serial number range where there was a problem that was subject to recall.
Your Honor, I'd move to enter defendant's exhibit number 13 into evidence. Who is that?
Do you remember how many cases you were working on that summer?
I don't keep a daily log. Typically, I work 100 cases a year.
Do you remember writing in a correspondence to one of the officers on this case that you've been working on so many cases, I can't seem to keep some of them straight?
I've worked 5 cases this week, and sometimes it's very hard to keep cases straight.
And yet on July 24th, when a message was left to you from the Lexington Police Department that you had to narrow down the list of possible firearms, you were able to call them the next morning with an answer, right?
Typically, if I make a call for assistance post on our professional forum, somebody has an answer and will post it within 15 minutes.
And when Detective Wolf dropped off the casings in this case, you were able to put aside what you were working on and examine them that same day as well?
Occasionally we do that.
Because your lab was told to make this case a priority.
I'm sorry?
Because your lab was told to make this case a priority.
Any murder case is a priority in our laboratory.
And again, you had never examined the Springfield XDS before this case, right?
At one point in time, I've never seen a space shuttle. This was the first time that I had seen that particular mark in 17 years of work. I was intrigued. I wanted to know where it came from. I made a professional post for technical assistance. It was answered.
And then issued a report that said it was possibly a Springfield XDS 45.
It's possible. I couldn't absolutely 100% confirm it.
And as you sit here today, you really cannot say that there isn't another Springfield XDS out there that would be a better or as good a match to the casing recovered at the scene.
I don't fully understand your statement. A better identification?
That there's not another casing out there that's a better match to the casing, another gun that would produce a better match to the casing found at the
There are not levels of identification within this scientific,
Or maybe
what we do.
So you can't say whether there isn't another gun out there that wouldn't produce a casing with sufficient agreement to item number 1.
It's a practical impossibility.
So while the Department of Justice and all the FBI firearms examiners cannot testify that a specific gun fired a specific bullet to the exclusion of all other guns in the world, that is not the same standard they use.
I'm not exactly sure what standard the FBI is using. I do know that they had a lead study and we're doing batch analysis and we're proven to be flawed. Have no reference to this letter that you're speaking of.
I'm not talking about bullet lead analysis, Mr. Pilcher. I'm talking about firearms toolbox examination, which is specifically what they were referring to.
The FBI has nothing to do with that, even its theory of identification. They can set their own standards.
Okay?
So a lot of times, the questions I want to ask have already been answered by the time I can stand up. I'm not, this is a waste of people's time. Springfield, as a gun manufacturer, you said before that plant before?
Good afternoon. Yes, sir, I have.
Okay. Now, in the grand scheme of gun manufacturers, are they big manufacturers, small manufacturers, middle road, where we at?
They make a moderate amount of guns, but they are a somewhat high-level, high-quality manufacturer. They have a small plant. They run CNC machines. Their plant is clean enough that you could probably drop your sandwich on the floor and eat it. There are other manufacturers that have been in business for 300 years that have vast, sprawling manufacturing processes, and their floors are so oily that if you're not wearing oil-resistant boots, you're in trouble.
Okay.
So it's a wide spectrum of manufacturing types and the amount of guns that are processed.
Do you have any sense for their manufacturing capacity, like how many guns they make in a certain?
I have no knowledge of their sales and what their manufacturing capacity is.
Okay. The serial numbers on guns in general, are they in fact serial as in sequential, like they, is it they make gun one, and they make gun two, the numbers?
They don't have to be.
Uh-huh.
The federal law just mandates that it has to be uniquely marked well, I don't want to say uniquely marked, but identifiable. Typically, manufacturers set up a serialization process where it's sequential numbers, and a machine takes over the process, and the next one is number 3, 4, ad nauseum.
So typically it's like that, you said?
It's up to the manufacturer and what they determine is best for their company.
Okay. And you don't know how Springfield does that specifically?
I have no knowledge of their serialization policies.
Okay. Would you call an XDS, a Springfield Armory XDS, a rare gun?
It's a new gun that's been out on the market. I mean, I would say less than 2 years. Well, I don't want to say that now. 5, 6 years now. But in the past 4 years, at the laboratory, I've seen one other XDS that was submitted.
Okay. So you having not seen one of these guns for so many years before you encountered this case, probably more due to the fact that they weren't being manufactured for most of the time.
There are millions of guns that are manufactured, and a lot of the manufacturers, their guns never show up in our laboratory because they're collectibles, they're high-end, they're very expensive. Typically, the guns that are submitted to us are guns that are cheaper, or that the term used to be Saturday night special. Something that you could find or buy, or something that was stolen, that you could purchase for less than $200. That's basically what we see in the laboratory. We do get occasionally guns that are $800, $900. The price of everything else goes up, as the years go on.
Sure.
What used to be a $100 handgun is now a $300 handgun.
Right.
But typically, we don't find targeting pistols that are $1,800 that are used, from a competitive shoot or anything like that.
Right. And this is in the realm of non-target shooting competitive.
No, this is basically, it was designed for self-protection.
Okay. And I was looking at this exhibit that was just put in. It looks like, specifically to the 45 model, the serial number range, if sequential, seems to be 186,300 pistols that they recalled.
It's possible.
So, okay, so that number, an idea like that of manufacturing that many pistols of the same type, that doesn't surprise you that Springfield may have manufactured that many?
Not at all. Smith & Wesson makes over 1 million pistols a year. Just them, and they're a large factory.
Okay.
I do know that their process runs 24/7. They don't need employees to run the machines. They're computer controlled,
Just run around the clock.
around the clock.
All right, that's it.
I just have a few, Judge. They showed you a recall for Springfield XDS firearms, is that correct?
There was a recall for this particular model.
Is it a recall for that particular gun?
No.
How do you know that?
The particular serial number range that the company released was 500 XS 500,000 to XS 686 300. This particular serial number on this gun is almost 10,500 higher, above the range that was in the recall.
Okay, so the serial number on that gun, are they identified by serial number?
Yes,
The guns that were recalled?
yes.
And so, but based on that serial number, you can determine that that gun was not included in that particular recall.
According to the serial number on this gun, it is not within that recall list.
Okay. And I've got a few other things. The lab where you work, the Kentucky State Police Lab, is that lab accredited?
It is.
And is your work peer reviewed?
Every one of my cases is peer reviewed.
Okay, and so other people look at it and see, and
Every case.
every single case you do?
Every case is examined by my supervisor,
Mhm.
or whoever he deems qualified to review my work.
Okay, so you don't work for the FBI?
I do not.
Okay. And you receive training to render opinions within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty about whether or not a particular firearm discharged a particular casing, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, I've had ample training.
Okay. And do you do reports when you examine a firearm and some casings so you can refer to it in the future?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite,
Sure. Do you do reports when you examine firearms and casings so you can refer to them later on?
that statement's not completely true. I do generate notes while I'm doing the examination,
Sure.
and then after the examination is completed, a report is drafted.
Okay. Well, I guess my point is, even though you have a lot of cases, like you said, you've done a lot this week, you keep something so that you can refer back to those
Oh,
cases
absolutely.
and keep it fresh. Okay. And they made a point of saying you've never received you've never seen a Springfield XDS before this case. Is that correct?
Up to this point, I didn't know they were on the market.
Have you locked it? Well, let me ask you this question. Whenever you actually received that firearm, the fact that you had not seen one before, does that inhibit your ability to determine whether or not those casings came from that gun?
No, it makes my job easier.
Okay. Do you do the same testing regardless?
Absolutely.
Okay. And let me ask you these questions. I forgot to ask you dates. Let's talk about those 3 submissions. When did you receive the first submission with the casing and the projectile?
My first submission was on September 5th of 2014.
Is that the date your report came out, or the day you first received those items?
That was well, hold on a minute.
Okay.
September 5th, 2014, Detective Wolf from the Lexington Police Department brought in a single projectile, classified as one projectile, described as removed from autopsy. That was on September 5th.
Okay.
It didn't go into my custody until July 25th.
All right. If I showed you something, would that refresh your memory about a date when it was actually provided to you? Would that refresh your memory?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
If I showed you a request for evidence examination, would that refresh your memory about?
Probably better than what I have in my hand. There seems to be some confusion here on it.
Okay, that's okay.
June 24th.
Okay, thank you.
And Franz Wolf brought it directly, personally.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the 5 casings that were included in the second submission.
These were submitted apparently on July 30th, 2014.
Okay, and are you aware of when you received the firearm?
The firearm was submitted September 5th of 2014.
Okay. And this screen asked you a little bit about a report called the PCAST. Have you heard of that before?
Yes, it stirred up quite a bit of controversy.
And you did say there are no firearms examiners or firearms and tool marks examiners that worked on that particular report. Is that correct?
But there was nobody in forensic sciences that was on that committee.
Who was in that committee?
Personally, I have no idea.
Okay, but nobody in forensic sciences?
Nobody.
Okay. And is that your governing body, the PCAST?
Absolutely not.
Okay. You still have a job?
I did.
And are you still permitted to testify in Kentucky courts?
Yes, ma'am.
And is firearms and tool marks examination still considered a legitimate science in Kentucky?
Your Honor,
And across the
approach,
country,
please.
yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Mr. Pilcher, you have still, since PFAS and to date, have still been permitted to testify in Kentucky courts regarding your opinion on firearms and ballistics. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And tool marks examination.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's all the questions I have for you. Thank you.
I have a copy of the PCAS report. If you could please read what the description is right here regarding the PCAS.
Judge, can we approach?
If you could just read that paragraph there. It's not too long, I don't think.
About the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. The President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, typically PCAST, is an advisory group of the nation's leading scientists and engineers, appointed by the President to augment the science and technology advice available to him from inside the White House and from cabinet departments and other federal agencies. PCAST is a consultant about and often makes policy recommendations concerning the full range of issues where understandings from the domains of science, technology, and in innovation bear potentially on the policy choices before the President.
And while it may not have members of AFTI, the trade organization, it does have
I'm sorry,
8
did you say trade organization?
It does have 8 federal judges on it, right?
I assume so.
That's all I have.
But not one of those people is a firearms and tool marks examiner.
Seems like they would be overqualified.
That's all I've got. Thank you.
Those were the comments, Judge.
Yes, Judge.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Council approach, please. We have one more witness, about 20, 30 minutes. You're on your road, and keep going. Keep going. Okay, come on, call your name.
Meredith Frank.
Meredith Rain, do you swear or affirm the testimony you give this fail to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Good job, I see you on the witness.
Can you tell us your name, please?
Dr. Meredith Brain.
And how are you employed?
I'm a medical examiner for the state of Kentucky.
And what does a medical examiner do?
A medical examiner in the state of Kentucky is a forensic pathologist, meaning I'm a medical doctor who performs autopsies to answer legal questions.
Okay. And how long have you been a medical examiner?
I've been a medical examiner here in the state of Kentucky for almost 5 years.
And Dr. Frank, if you would mind, speak up just a little, maybe move up. You're a little soft spoken. And what kind of, tell us about your education, please.
I attended college for 4 years, in which I received my bachelor's in biology and pre-medicine. After that, I went to medical school for 4 years at Southern Illinois University. I graduated from there in 2008. After that, I attended the University of Kentucky as part of my residency program. Residency is a training program after you go to medical school. So it's specific to the specialty that you do. So a surgeon would go to a surgery residency program, a family doctor would go to a family medicine program. I went to a pathology residency program. That was 4 years, which I completed in 2012. After that, I did a one-year fellowship program that's like an extended training specific to forensic pathology. And that was at the Medical University of South Carolina, which I graduated from in the summer of 2013.
Okay. And you talked about a medical examiner does autopsies. What is an autopsy?
So it's not exactly as you see on TV, but they sort of get part of it right. An autopsy is more than just the actual physical performance of the procedure, which they often show on TV, where they do the we do the Y incision and look at each of the organs and look for injuries, look for natural disease, things like that. But an autopsy also takes into account historical information provided to us. We assist the police with evidence collection off the body. We do toxicology testing, which is testing the substances in the body for certain chemicals, including drugs of abuse. And sometimes we have to do additional testing, like looking at things under the microscope. So an autopsy is basically, you can think of it as like going to the doctor and getting a history and physical exam, except our decedents don't talk to us.
And did you do an autopsy in this case on Jonathan Price on June 21st, 2014?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you about that. How did you begin your examination?
So we start the autopsy first with receipt of paperwork from the coroner. So in this case, it's from the Fayette County Coroner's Office. It's an authorization form that releases the body to us to allow us to perform the autopsy. And that's part of the way the legal system here in Kentucky works, is that the coroner has to authorize an autopsy in order for the medical examiner to perform the autopsy. So that's the first part. After that, we do what's called an external exam. And that's looking at the body, looking for normal things like hair color, eye color, height, weight, physical characteristics, anything that might be identifying like scars, tattoos. Sometimes the scars can give us an idea of if they've had any prior surgeries. Those are all the first part. Second part is to look at any medical interventions. So if somebody has had any emergency resuscitation attempts, has gone to the hospital, we document the tubes and different things that are on them. The third part of that external is to look for injuries. And these are the external injuries, of course. We would document scrapes, which are abrasions, bruises, which are contusions, any tears in the skin, which are lacerations, any gunshot wounds, stab wounds, anything like that. After we do the external and document those things, then we open up internally and look for not only the injuries that might be internal, but also any natural disease.
Okay. And tell us, did you know what you were looking for in this case? Do you have any information that would assist you in the external exam?
Yes. So this decedent was sent to us as a gunshot wound victim. He had been resuscitated or attempted to resuscitate at the scene, and I believe pronounced at the local hospital.
And in the course of your autopsy, do you take photographs
Yes.
of the individual?
Yes, we routinely take photographs.
Judge Mathers. Dr. Frank, I'm going to show you some photographs in this case and have you reviewed these in preparation for trial.
Yes.
Okay. Going to mark these columnless Exhibit 94. '94 through 101. You can take a look at those while I'm going through. Do you recognize these photographs?
Yes, these are the photos I took at autopsy.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you kind of as we're going through about the photographs, but let me ask you this question first. Did you notice anything during the external examination that you were able to conclude was the cause of death?
He had a gunshot wound of his back. Obviously, we needed to open him up to see where that bullet traveled, but that was most likely to be the cause of death.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what has been marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit 94. And Judge, at this time, I'll go ahead and ask to introduce Commonwealth's Exhibits 94 through 101. Okay. And I'm going to show you what's been marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit 94. Can you tell us what we see here?
You're looking at his back, so he's on his belly, and you can see out here the wound on the left upper back. That's the gunshot wound.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to take a look at Commonwealth's Exhibit 95.
This is just a closer up view of that wound.
Okay. And because this is a gunshot wound, were you looking for any evidence in particular?
Yes. So because there's just an entrance, we didn't see an exit. We wanted to x-ray the body and look for a bullet, which we would be recovering when we opened.
And did you do that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you Commonwealth's Exhibit 96.
This is an x-ray of his abdomen and pelvic area, and you can see this bright white object right there. That's a projectile.
And was the projectile recovered?
Yes.
And what did you do with that?
That projectile was transferred to the police department, to the forensic evidence technician, Tim Russell.
Okay. And I'm going to show you Commonwealth's Exhibit 97. Is that the projectile that was retrieved?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to show you some additional things here, and if you could tell the jury what those are. This is Commonwealth's Exhibit 98.
We're looking at a close-up of his abdomen, and it's hard to see it because it's cut off, but there's the belly button to orient you. So just below that, you see this bruising, which is called a contusion, and this abraded area, which is like a scraped up, kind of dried out, red-looking brown in appearance. That's an area on the abdomen where just underneath in the soft tissues of the abdominal wall, that's where the bullet was.
And I'm going to show you Commonwealth's Exhibit 99. And do you see anything remarkable in this photo as far as injury?
I don't think it's showing up real well on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's just a little too dark, but right there, there's an abrasion, which is like a scrape on the knee.
And it may be the same case for this as well, but I will publish to the jury if that's okay with the judge after this. Commonwealth's Exhibit 100.
By the elbow, again, it's a little dark, but there's also another abrasion or scrape.
Okay. And I'm going to show you Commonwealth's Exhibit 101.
And this looks like a close-up of the chin area. He had some abrasions, some scrapes on his face as well.
And that was what I was going to ask you. I'm not going to show this photo to the jury, but perhaps this would refresh your recollection. Did he have some injuries to his face?
He had several abrasions, forehead, nose, just above the lip here, and some on the chin.
Okay. Can you say what those are from? Or any of the abrasions for that matter?
They're non-specific, meaning they don't have a particular pattern, could be caused by several things. So, no, I don't know exactly what they're from.
Okay. Could they be caused by a fall, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. And as part of this autopsy, you talked about doing toxicology. Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
And what will a toxicology report tell you?
Toxicology is a chance for us to test several substances that we routinely take from decedents. One, we try to get blood. Two, we try to get urine. And three, we try to get vitreous fluid. And vitreous fluid is fluid that's in your eye. So in this case, we were able to collect all three of those items. Sometimes people don't have urine. Sometimes people don't have enough vitreous. But we had enough to test all three of those things.
And what were the results of the toxicology testing that was done on Mr. Price in this case?
So in his blood, he had ethanol, which is alcohol that people drink. It was 0.120%. You can think of that percent the same as what's reported, like when you hear a 0.08 grams per 100 mil. So it's the same kind of idea. This is 0.12. Urine was also positive for ethanol. That indicates that he was metabolizing, excreting, getting rid of the ethanol. And the ethanol in his vitreous, which is the fluid in your eye, was 0.131. So it's a little higher than in the blood, which is pretty typical when you're looking at vitreous and blood comparisons. Vitreous helps tell you what the blood alcohol was about an hour or two before their death. So it sort of lags behind the blood because it has more water in it.
And those kind of numbers, the 0.12 that you referred to in the blood alcohol level, what kind of effect would that have on a person?
So it's variable from person to person, but typically that's that euphoric feeling people have when they're drinking. They might have some decreased sensory reaction time, might be increased, sort of typical characteristics when people are drinking.
I'm sorry,
Typical characteristics of when people are drinking. It can vary from person to person, but in general, that's usually that stage of euphoria, relaxation.
Okay. And we talked about, you thought in the beginning when you did the external exam, the cause of death was going to be a gunshot wound. Did you confirm that?
Yes, when we opened him, the gunshot wound included injuries to his chest wall, to his lung, to the sac that his heart is in, also went through the heart, and was associated with a significant amount of bleeding within his chest cavity.
And so what actually caused him to die?
So he died because he had fatal wounds to his heart and lungs with associated blood loss.
Okay. And I think you said it went through his heart. How quickly is this injury lethal?
So obviously it depends on the individual how fast it's going to be fatal. But the your blood pumps through your heart, through your body, and circulates in about a minute. So when you have an injury to your heart that's going to prevent it from pumping correctly, you obviously don't have a very long time before you're going to start suffering those effects of not having blood being pumped to your body.
And would you be able to say how long it is before you would lose oxygen?
So once you're not able to pump blood, you're immediately going to start within minutes having effects on the organs, particularly your brain.
And can you tell the direction that the bullet traveled through Mr. Price?
So when we give a direction of the bullet, I'm referring to if he was standing in what's called standard anatomical position. It means he's standing straight up, he's facing out, and his arms are turned out at his side like this with his thumbs out. All right, so if he's standing like that, the bullet went towards the front, it went down, and to the right. So it's coming in here. I'll stand up to show you a little bit better. It's coming in here, it's going down, and it's about right here, just below the belly button. A little hard where my belly button is because I've got a baby in there, but
Okay. I'm going to show you one additional photograph that I've marked as Commonwealth Exhibit 102. Do you recognize this?
yes, this is a photograph. Looks like his left hand.
Okay. And I'm going to introduce this judge and publish the jury. And this is his hand. Can you tell their fingernail length?
Get a little bit closer. He has very short nails.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, and when you showed us the path that the bullet would have traveled, you showed it as if you were standing up. Was Jonathan necessarily standing up? Can you tell from your examination if he was standing or what position he was in when he received this wound?
I can't tell what position he was in. I can just tell you that the pathway of travel, if he was standing in the standard anatomical position, was in that direction. He could be in several different positions to get that same pathway.
Could that be consistent with him laying down?
It's possible.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
I think I only have one, because I don't think you mentioned it. Could you make a determination as to range, like how far away the shot was?
So this gunshot wound is what we call an indeterminate range, meaning I don't know from what distance, and I'll explain why. There are several factors that we can use to help determine range of fire. One is soot, which is expelled from the gun when it discharges. Soot only travels a couple of inches for most handguns. So when you think of the distance between the gun, the barrel of the gun, and the skin, if it's right up on the skin, you're going to see soot around the wound and probably some searing of the skin. As you move a little further away, it'll be around the edges of the wound. As you get further and further away, you're not going to see it anymore. It's not going to travel that far. The other is what's called stippling. Stippling is the unburned gunpowder that comes out also when the weapon is fired. So that creates little punctate marks on the skin depending on the distance. So that's going to usually be when the gun is at least a couple of inches away to sometimes, depending on the gun, can even extend a couple of feet away or more. But there are a lot of factors why you might not see either, and it doesn't necessarily mean it was a very far distance. One of those factors can be clothing. Clothing can prevent, sometimes depending on the thickness of it, can prevent that stippling from occurring. So when we don't see soot or stippling, we call it an indeterminate range of fire. We can't say for sure it was a distant fire, but we don't know what distance it was from.
And do you know?
Dr. Freeman, who were asked about the path the bullet took and how it went down and to the right in the body of Christ. Isn't that pathway also consistent with somebody who's bending over
It could be, yes.
or someone who's standing up from the ground?
If you were standing up from the ground, you would have to be like this to get that to go down to the right, so it's also possible.
That's all I have.
Dr. Frank, just one additional question. Did you note Jonathan's height and weight?
Yes.
And can you tell us about it?
He was 199 pounds and 71 inches, so about 5'11".
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Hi, we are going to break for the evening.